Wszystko zaczęło się od króla Jagiełły. Mała Łodzia stała się miastem, które w XIX wieku rozwijało się najszybciej na świecie. W ciągu zaledwie 60 lat od powstania pierwszej manufaktury powstaje przemysłowa, wielonarodowościowa metropolia. Jednak wiatry historii nie zawsze jej sprzyjały. To, co zniszczył los, odbudowują łodzianie. Nasza Łódź. Miasto wielkich szans. Od 600 lat w sercu Polski i Europy.
Jesteśmy Polakami. Jesteśmy niezwykłym społeczeństwem. Zawsze w obliczu wielkiego wyzwania potrafimy się mobilizować. Potrafimy stawić czoła wielkim wyzwaniom. Bo nie potrafimy stać obojętnie. Bo obchodzi nas bezpieczeństwo i przyszłość naszych dzieci. Bo wierzymy, że nadzieja zwycięża apatię, lęk i strach. Bo mimo wszelkich przeciwności nigdy się nie poddajemy. Potrafimy ciężko pracować, wspierać się i działać razem. Bo zależy nam na naszej ojczyźnie, naszym osiedlu, naszej ulicy. Bo chcemy naszych niezbywalnych praw i wolności. Bo nie oddamy naszych marzeń. Nadchodzi punkt zwrotny.
Dzień dobry.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to welcome you all to the meeting I have been looking forward to for a long time, the meeting with Rebecca Makkai.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Rebecca, ja myślę, że nie muszę Państwu...
I don't need to introduce Rebecca Makkai to you. However, we need to be formal, so I will read a short biography of our protagonist. Rebecca Makkai is the author of the novel many of you know, The Great Believers, The 100-Year House, and Music for Wartime collection. The Great Believers, the book which was published in Poland during the peak of the pandemic, and it impressed us a lot, and not only us, as it was in the finals of the Pulitzer Award and National Book Award, and it received a number of awards and literary distinctions, including ALA Carnegie Medal and LA Times Book Prize. Rebecca works at the Faculty of Fine Arts in Sierra Nevada College at the Northwestern University. She is also the art director of the foundation StoryStudio in Chicago. Her books have been translated into a number of languages. A very popular author. We are very happy to have her with us, and it's great to have this book as the pretext of our conversation. I have some questions for you. That's its title. Published not a long time ago. I encourage you to ask questions to the author. I cannot see you, unfortunately, but during our conversation, I will be talking to you, dear audience. Should you have any questions or would like to comment on what we are talking about or ask any questions, I do encourage you to do so. Freedom Games are for you. And I know you love Rebecca Mackay's writing, so let's enjoy this meeting. Initially, for the very beginning, referring to the questions, I would like to ask you the following thing. Can we still ask questions? Do we know how to do it nowadays? That's a skill has been disappearing. The world is constructed in such a way that we shouldn't doubt, we shouldn't ask questions, but without this skill, most likely we won't be able to develop and to grow. What do you think about it?
I think especially authors worry, and I teach a lot of young authors who believe that they need to go into a novel knowing already what they think. Right? They need to have a point to prove, they need to have a thesis statement, and then the book needs to serve that. And it's a recipe for disaster, just as a writer, because you're not going to tell a good story when you do that. It's going to feel very controlled, not real, right? But when an author can allow questioning into their work, which I always try to do, that's what fiction specifically is for, whether that's on the page or on film. You know, a nonfiction, I need to come in and tell you what I think happened. Fiction, I can contradict myself. Different characters can believe different things. A character can change her mind. And my job as an author, I think, is not to answer any questions. It's to ask better questions, to find the questions I already have and that you might have too, and then to get in there and complicate them further rather than try to make them more simple than they are. But I do think you're right. I think as a society, you know, we need to put something out in very few words on the internet and here's what I think, and that's not good for anyone.
Dużo o tym rozmawiamy na Igrzyskach
We've been
Wolności,
talking about
także o
it during the Freedom Games. We talk about the social media responsibility for the skills that we as the society lose. And this is all reverberated in a super valid context. The new novel, I have some questions for you, is a story that is a great pleasure for the reader, the pure pleasure of reading. I really regretted coming to the end, which does not happen very often. I really didn't want it to end, as I found great reader's joy immersing in the story you create. Body Kane, a female who resonates with me. She is a similar age, a maturing woman who grew up in the 1990s, and after some years she comes back to Granby School. She is a graduate of the school, and she comes back as the visiting professor, and she's going to teach children how to make podcasts for 2 weeks. She specializes in it. She is a famous podcast creator. And I'm not going to spoil the story to the audience, but one of her students decides to come back in her podcast that she's going to prepare to a story from as many years as when Body Kane attended the school. It was a story of a murder that took place at the university campus. Digging into the history often ends in trouble, and it's not going to be different in this case. You call this book the literary feminist boarding school murder mystery. You can translate it into Polish, and owing to this definition, you are going to find many threads in the book. However, we can talk for hours about it because it includes plenty of histories. There are 2 time levels, 2 time planes, and the book as such touches upon valid stories such as the pandemic or hearing of Kavanaugh. I don't know if you remember the American history. What was it like to write the book, which is so close to our reality, to the reality we live in? And I would like to appreciate that it is something more than, talking about current issues. What is it like to write about something in which we are still immersed and we cannot keep distance to it?
Yeah, I think that, this is my second book translated into Polish, but it's my 5th book overall. And it's really the first time that I've written so immediately about the present moment. So I've set things in the present before, but really digging into what does it mean to be alive now? What does it mean to be a woman right now? What does it mean to be a thinker right now? Essentially, I was not writing about someone exactly like myself, but I was writing about someone demographically like me. She's a woman, she's my age, she has children like me. And so, although we have very different life stories, I allowed the air that I was breathing as I wrote this book from 2018 until whenever I handed in my edits. It was during, COVID happened in there, but also Me Too was happening. All of us were looking back on our own pasts with very different eyesight. I was thinking about, many different things coming up in the news. I was thinking about violence against women. I was thinking about wrongful incarceration in the US, and I let all of those things just come into the book. Partly because it happened organically, and partly because I set out this time to write a very realist novel. I don't always do that, but this and my other novel that's translated into Polish, they're both very realist. And realism is going to lead you into those issues. It's only in a sort of surreal world, a stylized world, that you can avoid the realities of politics and gender and race and all of that. When you actually write about a real world, those are there. So I start to write basically a murder mystery, which is often a very stylized kind of, fun thing, but then I look at it realistically, and I need to look at the prison system, and I need to look at race, and I need to look at gender, and those things are all lying in wait already in that story.
Wspomniała Pani to sformułowanie high school mystery.
You mentioned high school mystery concept. Yes, indeed, but it is really very well constructed high school mystery. The book is also about our human fascination with violence. Why are true crime podcasts so popular, in your opinion? When we look at the top of the most frequently listened to stories, they are true crime stories. This is the fascination with violence, but violence against women. We need to remember. I mean, your book deconstructs in a certain way this type of writing about violence. Taking the opportunity, I would like to say that deliberation on how thrillers, crime stories are constructed, both films and videos, should be at the back of our heads, because typically females are victims, are subjects of violence, having no will to contradict. I do remember Bridget Lawless proposed a literary award. I haven't followed what happened afterwards, but a special literary award for thrillers and crime stories that do not see females only in such a role. They do not doom half of the humankind to being subjects of violence. I'm wondering what you think about it.
Yeah, that's a great idea for an award. In the U.S. also, I think part of it. In the US, the first podcast that anyone really listened to was a very famous true crime podcast. And it sort of set the stage for this being almost what that media was for. But our fascination with true crime is, as old as humankind. And, I try to look for, I try to examine my own interest in that, right? If there's a story that I can't look away from, why is that? I think there's probably something evolutionary. Most of human history, we're wandering in small groups of people, and if your friend is dead, you probably should figure out why. Was it those berries he ate, or did this other person murder him, and you need to kick them out of the group really fast? It's in your best interest to know and to talk about it, to gossip about it, to ask people what they know. And it's very hard to turn off something that maybe is there for our survival. And maybe there are other reasons too, but that doesn't answer the question of why is it dead women beautiful, young, dead women. And what I did in the book, it's funny, this is of course by definition, not true crime. This is fictional crime. But I took true crime as a subject within the book. The idea in the book is that this case that happened when my narrator was in high school has become very famous. It is one of those cases that you've already heard of, and I list a bunch of others so you feel like maybe it exists in this context. And I did choose very deliberately to make her young woman, wealthy, beautiful, essentially to say, let's look at the kind of case that does get fetishized, that does get talked about. Let's look at it with a realist lens. Let's look at it directly. And let's look at what that attention, that global attention does to a case like that, to the investigation, to the victim's family, to the accused, to the police. And that, that led me in directions I didn't expect, as I said, with, these heavier themes. But it was a little bit of me saying, okay, I too am fascinated with this and I don't want to be. So I think that the best thing I can do is look directly at it for an extended period of time and try to figure out why.
Na chwilę zboczę, odejdę od książki.
Let me deviate from the book for a moment, because the very fact that we are in Łódź, which is so close to Budapest, requires asking a question about the past of your family. I know that your family left Hungary to the United States. I would like to ask about your grandmother, who was a Hungarian writer. I would like to ask you whether is this a kind of burden for you, or quite to the contrary? Is it something that facilitated your thinking about yourself as a writer and something that oriented you towards this path? For you, what does remembrance of the distant European past mean? The European heritage, what does it mean for you?
Yeah, it's a great question and it's complicated. My father left Hungary in 1956, this failed revolution. He was a poet, actually, and a literary translator. And he lived in the US for a lot of his life, but then moved back to Budapest, where he passed away a few years ago. His mother was a very well-known Hungarian author. And actually, I have to tell, because there's a Polish connection. So I'm like 1/32 Polish. I'm a tiny bit Polish. So my grandmother had an ancestor whose name was it was Ignac Ostrowski.
Classic Polish.
Yes, left in
100.
Right, left during the November uprising and ended up. And in Hungary, it goes last name, first name. And so he somehow ended up with Ignaz as his last name instead. So my grandmother was Róża Ignác, or in Hungarian, Ignác Róża. So it's a Polish first name that became her last name that she was known under. But so she met me once when I was a baby, before she died. She died in an accident very suddenly. And so I did not know her. And I have been working on my Hungarian for a very long time, but you might know it's one of the, if not, it's basically the hardest language in the world to learn as an outsider. I have a little bit of a head start, having heard it so much, a little bit of baby talk, but I am nowhere near yet being able to read her books. So she wrote 40 books, and I have most of them sitting on a shelf in my home, and I can't read them, which is a bizarre situation, right? So there's a couple of ways in which she has, there has not been that influence. One is that if I grew up in Hungary, everyone would have, as I start to publish, they would absolutely already know who I was, and I would be considered, the part of this family. And I guess I would wonder then, did I make my own name? Whereas in the US, no one's ever heard of, any Hungarian writers, let alone her. The other thing is that because I haven't been able to read her work, there's no influence there. There's no, right? But I certainly grew up with the idea that being an author was a viable career path, which not a lot of people do. You might not even know a writer, let alone come from a family of writers. And even that feeling of like, oh, maybe I have something, you know, genetically that I can use. I don't think that's probably true, but maybe that storytelling kind of mind. I will say, you know, I think that I probably have a lot in common with her. I've been told that I have mannerisms that are the same as hers. So maybe there's something there, and depending what you believe about ancestors being involved from beyond the grave in your life, maybe. But I do think that I have a context for thinking about the role of the author in the world as being, whether you want to or not, a political role. She was very often throughout her career, she was in hiding from both the left and the right at various points. She was censored. She had to have a couple of her manuscripts smuggled out of the country and only published after her death. That perspective, it's very different than I think a lot of American authors in particular, this idea of like, I want to write this book and get famous, I want to write this book and make money, I want to write this book. Those are lovely things to want, but I think I have always seen my writing, even when I don't set out to write a political book, I'm always very aware that this is, I am putting my voice out there, I'm risking something of myself, and that literature, there is a reason that oppressive regimes come after books and authors first. Because of the power of what's contained in there. And so that's always in my work, even when it's something like a murder mystery in the woods, it's still going to be in my work.
To jest bardzo polityczna książka. Nie wierzcie Państwo w to, co mówi autorka. Tam jest mnóstwo...
It's a very political book. Do not trust her.
Mówię, że jest tam rzeczywiście bardzo, bardzo politycznie w tej książce.
This book is very political.
Tak. Polityka wybrzmiewa
politics
w takim czy innym
is heard in the book all the time, in one way or another. So if you have read the book, I hope you will agree with me. So we have changed the topic, so I would like to ask you if any one of you would like to ask a question or contribute with a comment. Please don't hesitate, there are mics. If there are no questions, I would like to encourage you to prepare some questions, and we will continue our discussion. Be brave to ask your questions. This is a special occasion. This book is also about the return to the place where we have grown up, and this is often used in literature, in art. We go back to the places we remember as completely different places, and the big river we remember from our childhood, it's just a small stream. Huge trees turn out to be just very thin, small trees. So the past looks completely different when we confront it with the present. So the main character goes back to school, and now she looks at the school with the eyes of a mature woman. She observes the school with the eyes of the person who knows the mechanisms of violence that can be used in such places, including sexual abuse. So I wanted to ask you about this figure of return, because nowadays we had this huge revolution of Me Too movement. So how do we look at our past? Because I think that most of us, all of us, when we are looking at our schools, how they operated, how the institutions in which grew up, how they function now, we also look at our families, and sometimes we are really horrified. So how to cope with looking back with the eyes of the person who used to perceive it in certain ways?
Yeah, it's funny. There's some old school American author who had some huge statement that I think is very silly, that all stories are one of two things: either someone sets out on a journey or a stranger comes to town. And many stories are like that, but it's certainly not all stories. And I think another big category there, if we're going to talk about going and coming, would be someone returns home, right? And there are, for one thing, there are a lot of classic stories out there with that setup. Also, that's a big theme in most people's actual lives. Like I think about my father, returned to Budapest after 50 years living in the US. Whether it's just going back to your childhood bedroom or a city you haven't seen in a long time, and you measure yourself against the person you were when you were there last. You also have that changing perspective of age, but also of history, right? That things that were acceptable maybe at one point in time are not now, or they never were, but you thought you had to pretend that you were okay with them. That I'm always interested in time in my work and in the layers of time. I made a decision with this book. I have done books that jump around in time. And The Great Believers, my previous book, moves back and forth between the 1980s and 2015. Since I had just done that, I did not want to do that with this book. And I did not want to write a book just about an adolescent from her point of view. So I decided I want this to be an adult looking back. And that meant a couple of different things. One was, it meant that this had to become a book about memory and memory's failures, the inconsistencies of memory. I couldn't pretend that she can summon up a whole scene in detail, 5 pages of here's what happened, and then I turned left, and then he said this, and this is years before. So I had to represent memory as it really is, which is fractured and inconsistent. It also meant that I was, really taking on this idea of how things change in our estimation, how times change, how morals change, how customs change, how people change. And that's, of course, that was something that was on my own mind as well. Thinking back with Me Too, I did not give my character my exact experiences, but these similar revelations of, oh my God, we all stayed quiet about this and we should have said something. Or, I laughed this off because everyone else seemed to be okay with it, but I wasn't. And now that we're all talking about it, it turns out nobody was okay with this. That had to come in there too. So every book that I've written, essentially, takes some very specific approach to time. I had a book that's not translated into Polish that moves backwards throughout the 20th century, for instance. But this one, it was really, what happens if we are locked into the present? We don't get flashbacks. We don't get to jump back there. We're stuck here, which is true to real life, right? Everything you know about who you are and how you got here today, it's all a memory. And what if I represent that as accurately as I can on the page?
Kiedy czytałam pani książkę, myślałam też
I was reading your book. I was also thinking of another author, Emi Srinivasan, and her book, The Right to Sex, which was published this year in Poland. Me Too, you have mentioned as an important element of the events that are described in the book. Very often this movement is referred to as the plot against men. Srinivasan in her book states that there is something in it. This is the plot in America. This is a plot of white men against black ones. So I'm paraphrasing her words. So your book is also about this topic. You're writing about how the people who have power,
idąc na skróty, kierując się uprzedzeniami,
they use their prejudices, they use violence, and they accuse the weaker ones. In your book, well, I'm not spoiling the book because you find out about it at the beginning, so it's not the white male who is accused of the murder, who is not
więc jest takim bardzo wygodnym sprawcą.
who's not a teacher, he's a perpetrator, he fits the category of perpetrators. Then the students who are preparing the podcast, they are making an investigation and they are considering whether maybe it's a matter of prejudice when he was accused of the murder. So I wanted to ask you about the reactions to this plot in the United States, because I think that these reactions can be quite interesting. So I'm very interested in this.
This was something that, as I'm talking about having this kind of, this realist approach to this, I was going to choose between, is this an unsolved case or is it a wrongly solved case? And I thought it was more interesting to have a wrongly solved case, something that people thought had been put to rest, but that maybe is still, is unsolved. Again, with the realism, a disproportionately large number of wrongfully incarcerated men, especially in the US, who are later exonerated, are Black men. And so it felt like, I should go down this road. It's scary to do that, because what if you get it wrong? What if people are upset? But it also felt wrong to have a white man in that role. Of course, it's possible, but it felt like I should do this, right? Yes. And then that means that I need to be writing about race. And I will say, I think something I strongly believe, and that a number of other authors in the US have talked about, is that writing about race should not be left only to people of color. White people need to be writing about race and examining race and examining the construction of whiteness, which, in the US is deeply complicated. I mean, everywhere, but, examining what does that mean to be able to look away from things? What does it mean to be presumed innocent in a certain situation? So that was something I wanted to look at directly. It's not the very center of the book, right? Yes. It's something that is in the book that I wanted to give its due, but it's not the topic. And then even that, I have that balance of, well, I don't want to push that off into the margins and make it, only this little subplot, because then I'm doing the very thing that I'm criticizing. So I had to find a balance there. How do I fully represent the experience this man is having in prison at the same time that his voice is silenced? Yes. And that's a big part of the book. But no, the reactions have been really good. Of course, it's important for me when I'm writing about people other than myself, or demographically very different from myself. It's very important that a number of them read the book before it goes to press. So with The Great Believers, I needed, a number of gay men, people who had been intimately involved in 1980s gay Chicago, to read the book.
Beta readers, yes?
Yeah. Before it ever went to my editor, and tell me any little thing. And so the same was the case here. A couple of, Black men or about that age, to read the book, very intelligent, writers who could speak to not just did this sound right, but what is the craft issue, what's the structural issue. It was incredibly helpful, and it's an important part of my process anytime I'm writing about something that I can't write about from personal experience.
To może ja Państwu przeczytam tylko fragment książki.
I will read a fragment of this
Omar,
book.
ten człowiek ma na imię Omar.
Omar, it's his name. Brit is asking whether Omar is blaming the school for what has happened. Then there is silence. Omar says they didn't try to use me, but the director was pressing police to resolve this case and not to look at the teachers and students too much. So Granby has so many lawyers. Granby is so rich. I understand that no specific human being will say, okay, let's blame Omar. But when you press someone hard enough, you will get what you want. And they wanted someone like me. So just to illustrate this fascinating plot. This book is also the book about relations between the power, authority, and the consentment. Consent. There's a moment of the intimate relation between a student and a teacher. Maybe it was consensual relationship. She gave permission. Anyway, that was the relationship that was very asymmetrical because she was a pupil and he was her teacher. But on the other hand, and this is incredible in your book, there is the plot of the husband of the main character who is cancelled for something similar many years ago, but it was about a love affair with a 22-year-old artist whom he presents as the curator, somebody who works for an art gallery. So I wanted to ask you, this is very difficult, these are very difficult topics. So how to proceed not to become entangled in it?
Right. I mean, and the way that it was translated for me was to become entangled in it, and my job is to become entangled in it, I think, right? This is what I meant earlier about, one of the benefits of fiction is that I can contradict myself. I can give these two cases that, one to most people would seem absolutely unacceptable, and 99.9% of people are going to say this is a bad case. And another one where some people would say this was fine. There was a big age gap, but they were both adults. There was no coercion. She wasn't his student, but that some people are very upset about. And I can put those side by side in the same book, and I can really trap my narrator between those two, that she is saying, no, this one was wrong, but I'm okay with this one, and why, and is it a spectrum, or is there a line?
Where's the line?
Right. And I can ask those questions, the book can ask those questions, and my narrator might have one reaction, the reader might have a very different reaction. I deliberately made the details of that case with her husband ones, I did not make him as guilty as I could have, and I did not make him as innocent as I could have, so that it is a little bit marginal. And, you might, a book club might argue over this, I don't know. And certainly, my narrator, Bodhi, comes to his defense, and then people are very mad at her. It was, I think that a book that only comes out and says, look, all of these men are bad, all of these men are predators, we need to put all of them in their place, we need to look back and hold everyone accountable, all the women are right, all the men are wrong. It would be a very flat book. I need to have counterbalance there. I need to punch holes a little bit in that, even as that's part of the book. These cases where that, we do need to hold someone accountable, I need something on the other side of the scale too. I need to mess it up. I can't just, my life would be a lot easier if I could just write one thing.
Proszę Państwa, czy może już teraz...
Ladies and gentlemen, maybe now anyone would like to ask a question. I know that the first question is always the most difficult to ask. Well, no questions? Not yet.
I always say the same thing whenever I'm interviewing anyone, I always tell the audience like that we need one person.
Exactly.
Oh, there is one. Yes.
O, przepraszam, czy mogę poprosić o podejście z mikrofonem?
Nie? Okay, let's have a mic.
Także pisarka będzie pytać, z tego co widzę.
And I can see that the author is going to give you this question.
So my question is about your process, because I just really love listening about different writers' processes. Please tell us, how do you start writing a book? How the idea comes to you? How does the progression work? I would be really grateful.
Yeah, I'm delighted to. So I actually have this, I need to think about a book for about a year to a year and a half before I do much typing. And I do consider it writing, what I'm doing. And I'm always...
Oh, that's super cool idea. I love it.
Yeah.
So there's like typing and writing.
Yeah, that's it.
So I do work even though I'm not writing.
Yes.
No, I'm writing even though I'm not typing.
Not typing.
I
Yes,
love it.
yes.
I'm taking this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, so going on a walk and thinking about the book, that's writing. Making an outline, that's writing. Research is writing. And I have students who will be working on a novel, and I'll say, okay, how much progress have you made since 2 weeks ago? And they'll say, oh my God, I got no writing done. I went on this research trip and I interviewed this person, and then I thought a lot about it, and then I made notes, but I didn't get any writing done. Like, you did a lot of writing. So for me, I need it's usually about a year and a half of turning the story around in my mind. And what's wonderful about that phase is I can make big changes in that time without having to go into my manuscript and undo anything. So, for instance, in this book, Bodhi, just what her occupation would be changed so many times for me, right? So, like, is she a doctor? No. She's a ballet dancer? No. And I can't even remember now what the things were, but I finally settled, okay, she's a film history professor. She has this podcast. If I had been typing all those other things, I would have either felt like I had to stick with them.
Yeah.
Or
Job is done. Yeah.
Right, or I'd have to go in and delete all this stuff. So that's the first part. By the time I start typing, it's usually pretty fast because I've done all this work mentally. And I usually go so far in my thinking as to plan out scenes, to think of dialogue, to know my characters very well. But of course, it's not like it's all a smooth road from there. There's a lot of undoing still. There's a lot of outlining it all on note cards. But I work on my laptop. I take it to the coffee shop. Sometimes I get to go to an artist's retreat for a couple of weeks. It's not the most romantic picture of a writer sitting with your laptop in Starbucks, but that is the reality. And then many rounds of revision and retroactive outlining and printing it all out and moving pieces around on the floor. At least half of the process is revision, which is hard, I think, for beginning writers to understand, and for readers, it's probably not what you'd guess, just the amount of revision that we do. But that's where it is. And I'll say, like, right now, the novel I'm working on next, I've just kind of come out of that year and a half of thinking and researching. And I'm actually writing. And on the train from Gdańsk to here yesterday, I wrote quite a lot. I was very happy.
Good to hear that. Czy ktoś z Państwa ośmielony tym pierwszym?
Anybody who has become brave after the first volunteer? Okay, we've got some more questions.
Do you have any book in a drawer?
Yeah, that's a good question. Do I have like the book that I wrote and abandoned in the drawer? Yes and no. So, okay. Many years ago, in my previous life, I taught Montessori elementary school. And I did that for 12 years. I loved it. I loved those kids. And just really for fun, I wrote 2 children's novels for them and with them. Like I'd read them a chapter and I'd ask them for suggestions, or they would illustrate, or they'd research something for me. And the first one I liked well enough that I thought maybe one day I'd send it out, but I don't think I would like it anymore. So the second one is lost forever. I think it died with an old computer. The first one exists somewhere in the world. But in terms of adult novels that I really sat down and went, okay, this is it, I don't. I have a couple false starts, just like a first chapter that but my mindset personally is that anything is fixable. I don't think there's such a thing as a bad idea for a novel unless it's deeply offensive. You know, if you describe the plot of any novel and say, is that a good idea for a novel? Well, I don't know. Like, you describe the plot of Frankenstein to someone who's never read it. Is that a good idea for a novel that this guy stitches together dead body? No, but it works because she made it work, right? So I think I also actually have very few abandoned short stories. Most of them I've finished and published. I just feel like, and the only reason I would abandon something is if I just really did not care about it anymore. If I still care about it, maybe I put it aside and come back to it, but I just need to unlock what is the problem, what is this book missing, or what is there too much of, or what is not connecting for me or with a reader. Yes and no. These mysterious children's novels that no one will ever see, but not of my adult work.
Czy ktoś jest tam jeszcze z ręką do góry?
Any other questions?
Yes.
Jest pytanie, proszę.
I would like to know if your books were read by sensitivity readers, and what do you think about this, I don't know, institution?
Right, so this is a bit of what I was talking about in terms of readers looking for, you know, in this book, just the black male perspective, talking about prison culture, and also my gay male readers with the Great Believers. I think that within reason, it's a great thing. With these, almost all of these were people I personally found myself. One of the readers on this new book was someone that the editor hired for me to read it. But for other elements, like I had a lawyer from New Hampshire look at the legal things. And these are just friends. These are people I could call on for a favor. Someone could certainly make suggestions that go too far. Someone could take this, to the extreme and try to water down what you're saying, or you could disagree with the person. But in every case that I've had someone look at my work from an identity perspective or an experience perspective, their notes have made the work stronger. So I am in favor of it as a general concept. Someone could be, overzealous in that job, but it has been a good thing in my life, in my writing life, whether that's, something informal that I've done, or in this just one instance, a more formal arrangement.
Okej, to teraz ja.
Okay, so me now again, but you're still encouraged to ask questions. 9.5 minutes left to the end of the meeting, so it means we still have time for questions. I would like to ask you about the dynamics of on the internet, meaning arguments, quarrels, I don't know what people, elderly people over 40 call it, but this is the motive you find in the novel. Somebody gets drunk and posts something on Twitter. Generally, we do discourage you from such activities. Better not try doing that. But I would like to ask you, but I'm not asking whether you drank a glass of wine and published something on the internet. That's not my point. But have you ever participated in such an argument on the internet, and has it ever struck you personally? Because it's really suggestively described in the book what happens to the person who experiences such a thing.
Right. I mean, I wanted that internet culture to be very much a part of the book, of that present day. We're in this moment right now. And I'll say, just as a side note, I see a lot of writers they're afraid to put details of modern life, of technology, into a story because they think it will make that story seem dated in a few years. And first of all, you're very lucky if someone's reading your work in a few years, right? Secondly, they'll understand, right? I read books from the past and I like the details of that time, right? But I have friends who teach younger students, high school, university age students, who will say they, even their students want to, not put internet stuff in, so they're all setting their stories in the 1990s, which of course they weren't alive for, so they get it very wrong. And why are they doing this? Anyway, no, of course I've gotten into arguments, of course, nothing terribly juicy, but sometimes you kind of you jump into the fray. More often what's happened is I have said something pretty benign and boring and someone gets very offended. And I had a bunch of very right-wing Americans very mad at me for a while. I tweeted a joke because people. Oh no, it's the worst. Well, yeah, Donald Trump supporters were wearing these red hats. Right, say Make America Great Again. And I just tweeted, I said, I wish that other people would stop wearing red hats because I see one from a distance and I don't know if I should be worried. And these people flipped out. It was on the right-wing news station. Really? It was, yeah. And just this and the good thing for me is that these aren't my readers. These are not. It's not like being scolded by sort of your people, and you go, oh my God, I did something wrong. I'm just going, this is hilarious that you guys are offended by this. But it was also scary. They were talking about where I lived, and there was some scary stuff there. So I'm incapable of really censoring myself, especially politically. I know I'm sticking my neck out there when I post my opinions online. What I've definitely tried to step away from, I won't argue with anyone about religion anymore, ever again, just don't get involved. And I'm gonna try to see the best version of what someone posted, right? They post something that you could take the wrong way, or you could give them the benefit of the doubt. And I've been taken the wrong way enough that I'm just going to always err on the side of the benefit of the doubt. They probably meant, maybe they meant well, so I'll stay out of it.
Może to jest jakiś sposób, żeby
Perhaps that's the way to deal with it.
Chyba nie słychać, nie? To ja mogę służyć moim mikrofonem.
I can share my microphone if you cannot hear me.
Ten nie działa, to zapraszam tutaj.
It doesn't work.
I have a more theoretical question for you. How important is for you rich vocabulary and sophisticated grammar in your books? Ooh. And how far do you agree with the statement that high linguistic skills are they elevate your level of experiencing of I don't know the word? Just thinking about it.
I love that. I've never been asked that question before. I love that question. I will say, both of my parents were linguistics professors, and both of them spoke. Well, my mother's still alive. She, probably speaks 10 languages. My father spoke about 16.
Oh my God!
So I grew up did not grow up bilingual. That would have been great, and I would have known my Hungarian already. But definitely rich, vocabulary in my home. Also, English has a much bigger vocabulary than a lot of languages. Our dictionaries are big compared to other languages, because there are just so many sources, right? There are German words, there are Latinate words, there are, just all these different cultures, all these different influences. And so it's something, to take advantage of. It also means that I'm in English, as well read as I am, I'm constantly hearing a new word that I didn't know. I think that I would shy away as a writer from using a word that I think the average reader won't know, because it's going to kick you out of the book a little bit, right? You have to stop and Google it, or you feel dumb. Maybe I can make it clear from context. And by the average reader, I mean the average very intelligent reader, because that's who reads, is very intelligent people. But I'm also definitely going to take advantage of the breadth of the English language and that unusual word that maybe people know, but it's not the first word you'd think of. We have so many words, so many concepts, in English where there are, 17 synonyms from different sources, and you could choose any one of them. And I will, I'm always looking for, especially in editing, it might not come out this way when I'm first writing, but looking for what is the most resonant word, what is the juiciest word, what word have I not already used on this page, because I don't want to repeat myself. It's something, I think that there are writers who talk, especially poets, will talk about like being in it for the beauty of the language. And despite growing up in that kind of household, that's not my main, I want to tell a story. The language, the beauty of the language is not my main focus. But in the editing, I do, that is my instrument. And I want to have that instrument in tune. And so I am going to think about it musically. I'm going to think about the shape of the sentence. I'm going to think about, how does it feel in the mouth? I need to read it aloud. And then, part of that is, the weight of each word. Is this a word that just sits there? Or is this a word that evokes other things that are useful? And it helps. The more words you know, the more choices you have.
Została nam minuta. Bardzo mi
There is a minute left. I'm really sorry. We need to wrap up our meeting, but first of all, I would like to say that the book was translated into Polish by Rafał Lisowski. Well done. It's important to emphasize who translates the books from other languages, who the ambassador of the authors is. That's very important. These are translators, and we need to emphasize their ingenious role. And Rafał Lisowski provided us with this great translation. And I've got a notice. Rebecca Makkai will be signing her books at the bookshop. Can you nod if I'm telling the truth? Yes, at the bookshop. I'm right. So if you feel like getting a signature and a short conversation with the author, I hope we can invite everybody to join us. Rebecca Makkai, thank you very much.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it and how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihre Ausreise
Jestem z zawodu lekarzem, zajmowała się diagnostyką chorób nowotworowych.
W Białorusi zajmowałam się mikrobiologią i molekularną biologią.
Byłem nauczycielem szkoły podstawowej.
Naszym celem jest budowanie umiejętności, które są ważne na polskim rynku pracy.
Szybko nabierają takiej pewności siebie, bardzo szybko się uczą.
Wszystko możliwe, kiedy starasz się.